Hi, everyone, and welcome to our very first ACE Meetup, where we help connect people that have cloud questions with experts that have cloud answers. So this month's topic is Cloud Connectors, and kicking off, we will have James Newton, a senior consultant on the Citrix Consulting Services team, run through a brief presentation on connectors, and then we will go ahead and move into the Q&A. So feel free to go ahead and start typing in your questions at any point and try to stump our expert panelists. And then don't forget to join us the second Tuesday of each month for a new topic and a new set of panelists. So without further ado, take it away, James.
Perfect. Thanks, Michelle. As Michelle said, I'm a senior consultant with the Citrix Consulting team. My main focus is the Citrix Cloud environments. And today we'd like to cover the topic of cloud connectors, as it seems that is a common topic for customers to ask about. So let's jump into today's agenda here. First, we want to get into the basics of the cloud connectors as to what the cloud connector purposes are and how they're best used and what services require those cloud connectors. Then we'll jump into where do you actually place the cloud connectors within your Active Directory domain. We'll talk about a little sizing and technical specifications, and then we'll jump into scalability and the reasons for the high availability on the cloud connectors. Okay, so the cloud connector, the main purpose of the cloud connector is to serve as a channel between the customer's resource location and between the Citrix Cloud control plane. And what that does is enables the cloud management without requiring any kind of complex networking or infrastructure configuration within the resource location. It also serves as a communication liaison between the customer's Active Directory, machine creation services, as well as their VDA components registered to these devices. The cloud connector is used on multiple services within Citrix Cloud, which is going to entail the Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktop Service, Citrix Endpoint Management Services, as well as the Citrix Gateway Service. And the cloud connector is secured over port 443 via SSL communications. Okay, so we'd like to do a quick overview of where the cloud connector is going to sit within the environment. So we'll just jump into this quick Visio that we have here. As you can see, this is just a standard deployment with a few components, and the cloud connector is going to sit right here in your resource location. And then as you'll notice that the cloud connector communicates via the control plane, which is going to be hosted by your Citrix Cloud environment. So this is where the cloud connector sits at a conceptual level within your environment. So with that being said, let's talk about how the cloud connector is going to live if you have multiple Active Directory domains. And we'll go through 4 quick scenarios here because these are some of the most common scenarios that we run into as we're designing environments. The first scenario that we're going to run into is a single domain, single forest. So within this scenario, your cloud connector is joined to just the forest1.local domain. There's no trust relationship needed as it's just a single domain. When you go into the Citrix Cloud Identity and Access Management, you'll see the domain forest1.local. When users log into Citrix Workspace, any user within the domain can log in, and any logins to an on-premise storefront is supported for every user in the domain. As you can see, this is probably the most simplest deployment for cloud connectors that we have, and the one that we run into the most often. And then we'll jump into our next scenario where we have a parent forest with a child domain under it. So in this scenario, we have the cloud connectors joined to the forest1 local domain at the forest level. As you can see, there's a trust relationship automatically between the parent and child domain. Within Identity and Access Management, we'll see forest1.local, as well as user.forest1.local, which is the child domain. User logins will be supported for all users within Citrix Storefront and Citrix Workspace. The next area that we have here is going to be multiple forest and multiple domains with a forest trust. As you can see here, in this scenario here, you can see that we have the cloud connector joined only to the forest1.local domain. However, there is a forest trust between the two domains. But as you can see, within the Identity and Access Management portal in Citrix Cloud, only forest1.local shows up. So that means that any users on forest2.local will not be discovered by the Citrix Workspace. However, users can still log in with an on-premises storefront in both forests. In our last scenario that we'd like to cover is the same scenario, except now we have cloud connectors deployed in both forests. and there's still a forced trust between. So as you can see here in Identity and Access Management, force1.local as well as force2.local show up. So this means that any users within these two domains should theoretically be able to log into Workspace without any issues. And from our testing, we saw that Workspace is able to authenticate all users in both Forced as well as on-premise storefront. So now we'd like to get into a quick sizing and scalability discussion regarding the Cloud Connectors. So we've done multiple testing here to see exactly how we can size these components out. So some of the technical specifications that Citrix requires for the Cloud Connectors will be, at minimum, the operating system needs to be Windows Server 2012 R2. The Cloud Connector requires at least a minimum of 4 GB of RAM. However, just keep in mind that the memory, CPU, and hard drive, all of those numbers can kind of fluctuate depending on what the environment is built out to do. The processor needs to be a minimum of 2 virtual CPUs, and the hard drive needs to be at least a 40 GB. As far as co-hosting the Cloud Connector, make sure that you don't place that software on any other machines inside your network that need to be up 100% of the time. Due to its nature, the Cloud Connector is evergreen, so it can be updated without warning at any time. That's also why we recommend to have high availability within this Cloud Connectors. So the high availability is just a basic N+1 configuration, where N is the minimum number to support the environment, and then obviously +1 connector to support that high availability. And any kind of internet connectivity from the Cloud Connector will be egress over port 443, which allows extra security and ensures that no traffic is coming into your environment from the Citrix Cloud Control Plane. As far as scalability, there's a couple of test variables that we've used. As you can see here in scenario 1, we have 2 Windows 2012 R2 servers with 2 vCPU and 4 gigs of memory. In scenario 2, we have 2 Windows 12 R2 servers with 4 vCPU and 4 gigabytes of memory. For our customer managed storefront, we have a 1 Windows 12 R2 server, 8 vCPU and 8 gigs of memory. And our VDA is currently installed on a Windows 2012 R2 as well as a Windows 10 32-bit environment. So the first test we'd like to go into is the VDA registration storm. As you can see here, the 4 vCPU scenario 1 was able to outperform this 2 vCPU scenario 2 that we have here. So what this chart shows is a percentage of total CPU utilization, so lower is better. So our next test is going to be 20,000 sessions launched through a Citrix Managed Workspace. The Citrix Managed Workspace, as you can see here, that the 4 CPU connectors, connector 2 and 1 at the top, have the lowest numbers as far as peak utilization. And as I said, lower is better because this is your total utilization. And the 2 CPUs kind of have a little bit higher, although the average is almost about the same there. All right, I hope this answers any kind of questions that you guys have about where to place your connectors, as well as any kind of how many connectors you need and how to scale those connectors out. So now we'll hand it over to Michelle to field some questions, and hopefully we'll be able to answer any kind of outstanding questions that you may have.
All right. Well, thank you so much for the overview on Cloud Connectors, James. And now it is time to move on to the Q&A. We have a panel of experts ready to answer any and all of your cloud questions. So joining James today, we have Mike Havens, who is an enterprise architect with Citrix Consulting Services. We have Samara Trejos, a cloud success engineer, and Rick Feiju, who is a distinguished engineer here at Citrix. So feel free to go ahead and start typing in your questions, and we'll go ahead and start with the pre-submitted questions and get the ball rolling.
Okay, yeah, we'll start with the questions that we have pre-submitted here. So our first question that we have is a WEM question. Let's get to it here. Okay, first question is, team, we have put in a workspace recently and we have a small number of users currently. We've discovered recently that the WEM Cloud Agent on the VDAs needs direct outbound connectivity itself to the WEM Cloud Plane, where we thought that the only Cloud Connector component that needed 443 egress We have been appraised by support that the Cloud Connector web service communicates outbound with the web cloud plane and passes a token back to the BDA, which needs to communicate outbound itself. Are there plans for the connector software to be changed so that it deals with the full end-to-end connectivity for the cloud service components? I ask this as our architects are referencing the Citrix Workspace documentation, where the understanding that only the cloud connectors and workspace resource locations need outbound connectivity. We're now having issues that the WIM service will not work with our proxy service, whereas no issues with the same proxy service with Citrix Cloud. So,
hi,
do we have plans for it? Perfect, thanks, Rick.
Hi, this is Rick Fejo. I can answer that question. So as we're evolving Citrix Cloud, there's various components that are on the customer premises that need to speak up to the cloud. After feedback from customers, the Citrix Cloud Connector being used as a proxy for all communication starts to become a bottleneck. And so what we are doing is we are looking at various components and having them be able to communicate directly out to Citrix Cloud, not via the connector as a proxy. And what we are further doing is we are working very diligently to make sure that all of those connections are documented, as well as being able to support all of the same proxies so that customers don't have to figure out how to do it individually with each service. And so that's something that we're currently working on.
Okay, perfect. Thanks a lot, Rick. All right, so our next question that came in here. We have a question. Let me get the screen to load. Okay. Does the Microsoft Active Directory Analytics integration require cloud connectors?
I can take that one. This is Tamara. So yes, it does. The reason for this is that you need a communication channel between your environment and Citrix Cloud. So in order for analytics to gather the data on your Active Directory users and so on, you will definitely require cloud connectors to integrate both. So the answer is yes.
Perfect. Thanks, Tamara. Okay, and then we have another question here that just came in. How many cloud connectors do we need in our environment? I know this was thanks, Michael. I know this was lightly hit on by the presentation, but if you could provide any more context around that, that would be awesome.
Sure. So from a number of connectors perspective, I think it's safe to say that we would want at least 2 per resource location. Especially if you want to take advantage of localhost cache, you want to make sure that you have them sized appropriately. But generally, we say you need the numbers are similar to a delivery controller numbers, but it's important to note that there is no limit on the number of cloud connectors you can have. So if you have a ton of resource locations, 10, 15, 20 resource locations, have 2 or 3 cloud connectors per resource location. That's totally supported, and it won't cause you any problems. So there is a minimum that we would want, like we want you to have at least 2 per resource location, but feel free to have multiple per, within the environment that's fully supported.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael. Okay, another pre-submitted question that we have, and then we'll jump into the chat questions here. Give me 1 second here. Okay, so the one that we have here is we have an on-premise hypervisor and also Microsoft Azure. We also have a VPN that connects to the Microsoft Azure environment to the on-premise data center. Per the recommendations, 2 cloud connectors were added on the hypervisor on-premise and 2 in Azure, and now there's 4 cloud connectors in total. However, under the cloud portal, when we go to the resource location, all of the connectors seem to be contained within there. Why does this happen, and would this affect anything if we keep it this way?
This is Tamara. I can take that one. So
when your environment is interconnected like that, it's sort of normal to see everything under the same resource location, but we want to have separate cloud connectors for both your Azure and your on-premises environment. The reason for this is this will allow you to assign users to zones and so on and so forth, and basically you want to split them up just in case you're doing MCS. It's best to have a pair of cloud connectors on each hypervisor or a public cloud, at least a pair, you know. So yeah, that makes certain that zone-related features are possible, like applications or user assignment to certain zones and so on. And that's why we recommend having 2 or more cloud connectors in each geographical zone that contains VDAs. So, and the way to sort of fix this would be you want to remove those and create a new resource location, and then re-add those cloud connectors or add those cloud connectors to the new resource location that you created. So be sure to name it something that makes sense to you, like Azure or you know, your on-prem hypervisor, just to know which one is which. But yeah, we do recommend splitting them up just for management purposes. It's better. That's it.
Perfect. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Samar. Okay, so let's jump to some of the questions that we're receiving live here. Specifically to the presentation, the question that we received was for the session launch scalability, was the gateway service utilized? There are actually a couple tests that were ran there. One of the tests did have an on-premise storefront, which would require the NetScaler to be in the customer's in that test environment as well. However, we did have a session launch scalability test where we ran with the Workspace service as well, although I don't think those results were published on the actual presentation there. All right, let's jump to our next question here. Okay, one that we have, let's see, this is a good one. Why should the PowerShell SDK never be installed on a cloud connector?
I think I can answer that one. So there's 2 places where you never want to install the PowerShell SDK. That is your cloud connectors and your delivery controllers if you're on premises. The reason for this is that it'll basically sort of hijack your PowerShell and you can't use it anymore. It's going to keep prompting you to enter your cloud connector credentials. So never ever install the SDK in a cloud connector or your delivery controllers. Because you will basically have to recreate that machine. If it's a cloud connector, it's not as awful, but if it's on premises and it's a delivery controller, you know the drill. So definitely stay away from that and avoid installing your cloud connectors your PowerShell SDKs in a cloud connector or on premises delivery controllers.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, another question that we just received. Can you explain how the access for internal users with the Citrix Virtual Apps Virtual Desktop Service works, specifically speaking through the cloud connectors? So it looks like we may have lost one of our presenters. So let me kind of hit on that one. So as far as the connectivity there, the access for internal users, it really depends if your storefront is in your resource location or if you're using the Citrix Workspace service. If you're using the storefront in your resource location, then if your users are accessing via the base URL of the storefront server, then those users will be treated internal. However, if you're using the Citrix Workspace service, the connection will be treated as external. So that's how internal user traffic would flow as far as with the Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktop service. All right, let's jump to our next question that we have here. Okay, next question is, one of our cloud connectors shows down in the cloud portal after maintenance. We realized we didn't have the antivirus exclusions on this machine and have since fixed that, but it still shows down. How do we make it go online again?
I can take that one. For this, you would probably just go ahead and uninstall the Cloud Connector software, remove the machine from the actual resource location, reinstall the Cloud Connector. That will make sure that it's clean and a fresh install, and it should go online again after doing that. Always remember to include, or to add antivirus exclusions on your Cloud Connectors to prevent this from happening, because otherwise, since these are evergreen, when an update runs, if the antivirus catches it, your Cloud Connector might show down. So be sure to check that.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, another question that we're receiving live here. Is there any way to force an update window? For example, only update between a certain time of the day for the Cloud Connectors?
Yeah, hi, this is Rick. I can take that. Currently, that is not a feature that is available, but it is on our roadmap. And I suggest that, so that's going to be coming out, it's on the roadmap, and there's an internal tech preview that may be happening. So I would suggest having, I don't know what we're doing for collecting emails, but maybe after this webinar, we can give an email where customers can sign up to do an internal tech preview for that feature.
Perfect, thank you, Rick. Okay, another question that we have here. For the Citrix Access Control, why is there a need for a gateway connector when there are already cloud connectors already deployed? What is the difference between these connectors?
I think I can take that one. So these are actually different components. The purpose of the gateway connector is to basically provide with your users with SSO capabilities. So if this is something that you're interested in having, you will definitely need to have a separate gateway connector or an actual gateway connector for your environment. So you need it for SSO mostly. If you don't want SSO, you can do away without it, but I would say, who doesn't want SSO, just might as well add that extra component. It's actually very simple to add, and there's instructions when you go to the access control and click on add a new resource. So you will see a wizard that sort of walks you through the entire process. So it's pretty straightforward.
Excellent, thank you. Give me just a second, let me scroll through the list here. Okay, we have a question here. It says, I have only an Azure Active Directory domain with Office 365, and I don't have any Active Directory on-premise environment. How should we proceed to configure my Cloud Connector with Azure AD? I do believe that the Cloud Connector itself only functions using the Microsoft Active Directory environment. So what you would need to do is actually deploy a Microsoft Active Directory domain service environment inside of Azure, and then join those connectors to that domain to be able to establish that connectivity. All right. A question that we just received is, how should we size a cloud connector for best performance?
I can take that, James. This is Mike. From a sizing perspective, we size cloud connectors the same way we size delivery controllers. So I generally start with 4 vCPUs and 8 gigs of RAM. That seems to be a sweet spot for starting out. You'll want to, when you are building those, if you have on-prem within the hypervisor, make sure you specify single socket 4-core to take advantage of the localhost cache, because of the way that works, that can only use a single socket. So 4 vCPU, 8 gigs of RAM is a good starting point for sizing the cloud connector.
Perfect, thank you. All right, another question that we have here. Are there plans to make the Citrix Cloud more robust, or Citrix Cloud Connector, sorry. Is there a plan to make the Citrix Cloud Connector more robust and have them be a truly active availability pair? Anyone able to answer?
I think generally from a roadmap perspective, we shouldn't comment on, anything officially, but I do think it's safe to say that the Citrix Cloud is ever evolving, so I wouldn't rule it out. That question goes to, or that answer goes to questions about, future EDT support or other kind of future roadmap items. Be on the lookout around Synergy time to see what new announcements we make. But I do think it's safe to say that the cloud services are always evolving, but we can't officially state roadmap that hasn't been already announced.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael. Okay, another question we have here. Is there a plan to support the Citrix Cloud Connector on Windows Core, or is there any date when this might be supported?
So this is Rick. I can answer that. We currently do not have any plans to support it on Core. We are looking and testing to support it on 2019.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, we have a question here. Is the Enlightened Data Protocol support coming in the near future for Cloud Connectors? Or for Citrix Cloud? I believe CC is talking about Citrix Cloud in this concept. So as far as EDT support, that is supported. However, you will need to have a NetScaler in your resource location. There are plans to support that with the Citrix Workspace service and the Citrix Gateway service that are on the roadmap. Okay, let's go to our next question that we have here. Okay, is multi-factor authentication with third-party tools such as Duo supported with Citrix Cloud?
Yeah, hi, this is Rick. I can take that. Right now, we do support multi-factor authentication in Citrix Cloud for administrators and end users with our integration with Azure AD. So if you're using Azure AD as your identity provider, all of the multi-factor authentication that comes with Azure AD is supported. We are currently in tech preview to support Active Directory plus TOTP, which is a protocol that's used by the popular authenticator apps like Microsoft Authenticator, Google Authenticator, and those is currently available in Citrix Cloud via tech preview. Again, we will continue to add more and more authentication in the future, and look to Synergy to hear some of the announcements that might be coming this year.
Perfect, thank you. All right, let me get through here. So here's a question that we received. We did a proof of concept and installed Cloud Connectors with a development name connecting to a development virtual apps and desktops. We will now go live with a production name. Can we install new Cloud Connectors and still use the original dev virtual apps and desktop server in dev? I think I'm trying to really understand the question here. So it seems the name of the connector may have been named dev, or a dev name attached to it. If we're speaking to it that way, then you would have to reinstall the software for that connector. You would have to uninstall and reinstall for the Citrix Cloud portal, or for the Citrix Cloud platform to recognize the new name of that connector device. If you mean renaming your customer name or et cetera in the Citrix Cloud portal itself, then that's something that you can probably reach out to your customer success manager to help out with. All right, let's jump to our next question here. Okay. When installing the Cloud Connectors, there is a prompt to input your username and password. Will I lose the Cloud Connector connectivity if that account password changes later?
I can take that one. So the answer is no, because what we use is a hash. So that hash will be stored, and it doesn't really matter if your password, your admin password changes for this later. So you won't lose connectivity.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, a question we received. Will Citrix Receiver / Workspace app single sign-on for PDs be supported by the Cloud Connectors in the near future, or will Storefront be required always for single sign-on?
Yeah, hi, Rick. This is Rick. I can take that. I think it's a little bit confusing. I'm not sure I understand what PD is there. So I'll answer it in a broad sense, and then we can, if there's more detail, please resubmit the question. So when Workspace is used instead of the traditional storefront, as long as Citrix Cloud is the one collecting the username and password. So if you're using anything with AD, single sign-on works. If there's federation involved and we are federating out to Azure AD, then currently today there is no single sign-on. Again, this is something that is on our roadmap, and we're working to support. And again, I would look to announcements that will be coming in synergy around anything to do with single sign-on when there's a federated logon occurring.
Yeah, we just got a quick update on that, Rick. It was for published desktops. That was the acronym for PD.
Okay. I think the answer is still the same then.
Thank you.
Hey, this is Michelle. Also, I just want to jump in and let everyone know that as part of your cloud subscription, everyone is assigned a dedicated account customer success manager. So feel free to utilize that. Make sure to leverage your CSM. That's what they're there for, is to help you connect with, especially with really any of these questions. But also if you want to get in touch with a PM or something to do a tech preview or get involved in that, then definitely reach out to your customer success manager.
Excellent. Thank you, Michelle. Okay, another question that we received here. Where exactly, or basically, can you please explain the communication flow and where the Citrix Cloud Connectors take part in that flow? I think this is one that I can take here. So the Cloud Connectors are kind of the communication liaison between the Citrix Cloud control plane, which is hosted by Citrix, and then your resource location, whether that be a public cloud such as Azure or an on-prem hypervisor such as Citrix Server. The Cloud Connector is going to be the middleman between these two locations, or many locations really, that establishes that communication, and that communication is secured over SSL, and it's outbound from the resource location up to Citrix Cloud, so it's secure. There's no inbound traffic there. So that's kind of where the communication flow is there. I think we touched on it a little bit during the presentation as far as where it sits there. But if there's any further questions around the exact communication flow, just please post those in the chat there, and then we'll try to get to them here. All right, let's jump to our next question here. Okay, so this question says, are cross-force logons supported here? For example, I'm a member of group in force 2.local, but I'll log in to force 1.local.
Yeah, hi, this is Rick. I can answer that. Today, that is not supported. The one thing that you can do in a limited fashion that probably needs a little bit more discussion, and we can see if we can get a more detailed answer, is if there's a cross-forest trust going on. But if the forests are independent, right now that is not supported.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, another question we received. Is there a matrix that displays when you should be using the NetScaler/storefront on-premise over the gateway service/workspace? Based on customer needs, for example, localhost caching on-premise would be best.
I can take that, James. This is Mike. So I do think that we are developing, kind of a reference architecture portal for customers with lots of recommendations around Citrix Cloud in general. I don't think this matrix exists today, but I do like the idea, and I will, put that as one of the items that we can include in that type of customer advice type of facing portal. From a general perspective, I think the reasons why we recommend going with a customer managed / on-prem NetScaler versus the gateway service, those change kind of frequently because of all the advancements we're making to the different services. But I do like the idea of having kind of an updated matrix that can help guide customers through making that decision process. Outside of that, as Michelle mentioned, that Cloud Success Manager can assist with that, as can Citrix Consulting Services. As part of a formal design process, we can help kind of guide you through when you need one versus the other.
Thank you, Michael. Okay, so speaking of Cloud Success, we have a question here. If two companies are integrating into one and they each have their own Citrix Cloud subscriptions already, what is the best practice to integrate these two environments into one so that we can manage from a single point? I think the best way to approach that is to reach out to the Cloud Success Manager to see if we can work to combine those environments. As far as the specifics, if they can be combined at this time, I'm not sure. However, I'd recommend reaching out to your Cloud Success Manager. They would be able to get you down the right path on combining those subscriptions. Okay, let's jump to our next question here. When using the gateway service and configuring a workspace, you choose either gateway service, internal only, or NetScaler gateway. When you want internal / external users to access the workspace, they go through the internet to the gateway service, even if they don't have local connectivity to the VDA with DNS resolution. Is there going to be any way to have beacons such as the ones in Storefront so that all internal users can access their VDAs through the high-speed LAN and externals only use the gateway service?
Yeah, hi, this is Rick. Today, this is not something that can be configured. It is something, again, it's on the roadmap to be able to make an intelligent decision there, just like we do with our traditional storefront product. Again, I would look out for announcements in this area, but right now that's not supported.
Thank you, Rick. All right, give me a second. I'll wait for the questions to load here. Okay, we received another question about the EDT. So as far as functionality of EDT, I'll just touch on it one more time really quickly. EDT is supported in Citrix Cloud. However, you will have to have your NetScaler currently needs to be in your resource location with your VDAs, as well as Storefront will have to live there. There are plans for the gateway service in Citrix Cloud to support that. Okay. Question we have here: Do does any of your on-premise infrastructure change with site aggregation? Can I take down my delivery controllers? How does the Cloud Connector fit in here with site aggregation?
Yeah, I can take that question. So site aggregation, you need to think of it conceptually as the functionality that Storefront has today to be able to aggregate multiple sites. So what you're doing is you're taking your site as is and you're pointing it to the Cloud Connector so that it can be aggregated into the Cloud Workspace. So the site itself continues to function exactly as it did before, except that the Cloud Workspace can reach out to it to aggregate it into the experience in the cloud.
Thank you. Okay. Since the Citrix Cloud Connector upgrades are evergreen, which means they can happen at most any time, what are some best practices to ensure that the change does not interrupt service? Okay. So the first kind of fail-safe that you want to have in place is to make sure that you have high availability for these devices. We normally recommend N+1, where N is the minimum number of cloud connectors to support the environment, and then you have +1 extra. So that will kind of help alleviate any kind of concerns if there was one to update, because these connectors normally don't get updated at the same time. Any other kind of fail-safes that you would think about outside of Citrix updates? Make sure that the connectors aren't on. Make sure that the connector software is not installed on a virtual machine that may receive updates from other services that may require auto updates. Make sure vice versa that the connectors aren't installed on anything that cannot be rebooted, such as your domain controller. You don't want that to get rebooted in the middle of the day. But basically, it all comes down to just ensure that you have high availability, make sure that you have enough connectors in your environment to support the load, and then throw an extra one in there just to be extra cautious.
James, this is Mike. I can add another item to that.
Okay.
So from a design perspective, designing around and being able to support that localhost cache that we talked about on the Cloud Connector is also another way to minimize the impact of change. If there is any update that affects the connectivity, or if there's any type of situation that causes that connectivity between your resource location and the Citrix Cloud, being able to leverage that localhost cache on the Cloud Connector itself would minimize the risk to end users.
Thank you, Michael. Okay. Question that we have here: receiver installed on a published desktop or even a workstation connecting to published applications. Right now, you can't point the store 0 to a Cloud Connector.
Yeah, this is Mike. So, in the question, it talks about pointing receiver at the Cloud Connector, but you wouldn't. You would point receiver at Storefront or at Workspace Service. So, yeah. So the person who asked that question, just note that you're pointing receiver at the store, not at the Cloud Connector. From internal, the only thing that's pointing at the Cloud Connector is would be your Storefront if you have Storefront on-prem, and your VDAs, right? So you wouldn't be pointing the end client receiver at that Cloud Connector.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay. A question that we received: what happens when a customer brings in the added complexity of using the connectors with Azure, AWS, or Google Cloud Platform? Are there any trust-related issues involved between the Citrix Cloud Platform and VDA registration that you're aware of, especially scaling upwards of 30,000 or more virtual delivery agents in multiple domains? This kind of seems like a multi-part question. As far as trust relationships, et cetera, a little bit was touched on during the presentation earlier. There is documentation. We may be able to reach out after the fact to provide you with the links that we have. As far as bringing in the added complexity of using a cloud platform such as Azure, AWS, etc., there's not a whole lot of complexity that gets added there. I'd say it actually fits into the greater motion of moving to the cloud. I mean, Citrix has made it super easy to actually incorporate these platforms into the cloud. So there's no necessary issues there between public clouds or Citrix Cloud in general. And like I said, as far as the as far as the trust related issues or trust documentation, I'll see if we can reach out after the call and get that information over to you. Give me a second here. Let's go through the questions. Okay. Question that we have: can the cloud connectors be load balanced, or what load balanced capabilities do they have?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So cloud connectors, again, just to be clear that I don't know if the question is about network load balancing or load balancing themselves, but they are naturally load balanced in the way they work by Citrix Cloud. So any connectors that are in the same resource location are seen as equal, and the cloud will use them and distribute the load among them. This means that, again, you can add, as we've spoken before, you can add as many as you need to be able to handle the load that's necessary. And so they are load balanced.
Perfect. Thank you, Rick. Okay, let's jump to our next question here. Okay, our next question that we have is there a way to see the list of questions from this presentation after the fact? If we can go through the questions and answers.
So I can take that one. Michelle and I were planning on creating a blog post for everything that we've discussed today, mostly the questions and the answers as well. So just keep an eye out for our new blog posts, and you will probably see one that sort of summarizes everything that we've touched up on in this call.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, I think that was most of the questions that we received through the chat and the pre-submitted questions that we have here. I want to keep the line open just for a few more minutes to allow you to or submit any more questions that you may have. Okay, since we just had one come in, let me get it pulled up here. Okay. When we provide the cloud connector name to the virtual delivery agents, can we provide a load balance VIP or DNS name instead of individual cloud connector machine names?
This is Mike. I can take that. You'll provide the individual machine names. This is similar to when we put the list of DDCs for on-prem delivery controllers. So you wouldn't put a VIP there. You would just put the individual cloud connectors.
Perfect. Thank you, Michael.
All right. Well, it looks like questions are starting to slow down. So unless you get one in really quickly before I finish wrapping up, we'll close it down. So thank you guys all so much for joining our very first ACE meetup. Like I said, this is going to be every month, the second Tuesday of every month at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, or Eastern Daylight Time. And thanks for all the panelists. Thanks for everyone for joining and submitting the questions. I hope everyone found this helpful. Like Samara said, keep an eye out for that post-meetup blog, and be sure to join us next month on May 14th. The topic will be Citrix profile management. So get your questions ready. If you want to submit them ahead of time, that is perfect. And also, like we mentioned over and over, don't forget to leverage your customer success manager. They're here to make sure that you're successful. And it looks like someone snuck in right in the nick of time.
We did get one last question here. What is the best way to see current connections or from which cloud connector the sessions are originating from, either from the gateway or the ICA direct? Basically to see that multiple connectors in a resource location are load balancing. I may be able to touch on this one. I don't know if there's a current way to see exactly which cloud connector a session is being proxied through. I know there are plans for that capabilities to be added. However, I don't know if there's a current way to actually display that information. If I can find something out for you, I'd love to reach out to you after the fact. However, I think that's more of something that's planned in the future to see that granular details of where the connector is established in that communication. But other than that, I would like to thank you guys for joining today and all the questions. And if there's any follow-ups, we will reach out to you directly. And like I said, thank you so much for attending our ACE presentation, and we look forward to seeing you next month.
All right. Thanks, everyone, so much. See you next month.